Fahrenheit. Who decided how hot is going to be 1 Fahrenheit? Because when you look at the values 32 and 212 for water, like what sense does that make? When you look at Celsius, it's 0 and 100. Like, of course we would use these values, right? They are so perfect. So who decided these values? And when I went into it, it's actually super interesting how the unit developed in history and how America actually nearly twice adopted the metric system with Celsius. Because the most interesting part is that Fahrenheit was here actually before Celsius. I won't go too deep into the history of measuring, but basically Fahrenheit was here 20 years before Celsius ever was. But the reason that Celsius was created in the first place was because Fahrenheit was thought of as pretty much unusual for the values that it had. Which makes sense, but why didn't then people just start using Celsius over the whole world? And that's where things start to get really interesting. Because the guy named Fahrenheit, when he was deciding the values to set of 0 Fahrenheit, he decided to make a mixture of water, ice, and salt. And where this mixture stabilized that, he decided that he's gonna call that 0 degrees Fahrenheit. And then using this measure, he compared it to where water freezes at and set it to 32 degrees Fahrenheit. And so the weird value that was created was only because he decided to start with a mixture of 3 things for some reason and then go into water by itself. So that's how the value of 32 was set. So after setting this 32 degree value, scientists decided they want to have 180 pieces before it comes to boiling. So from freezing to boiling, they decided to have 180 degrees. So that's how the value of 212 became, which is completely random. So the Fahrenheits were actually used in the whole Europe. And then a guy that thought that the Fahrenheit degrees were a complete nonsense, called Celsius, actually decided to set a completely new measurement using the values of 0 and 100. But he used it wrong because he set the value of boiling to 0 and value of freezing to 100, which was again complete nonsense for science. So after he died, to not offend him, the scientists changed it so that it would be actually 0 for freezing and 100 for boiling. But at that point, Fahrenheits were already being used in America. The US Congress actually wanted to adopt the metric system with the Celsius along. And this is where history was changed. Mr. Dumpy, a scientist from France, was sent by Europe to America to pass on the metric system with Celsius on a ship. But guess what happened? When he was approaching America with his ship, a strong wind happened and it actually sealed him away from the coast he was approaching, and it made him go into Caribbean Sea. And guess who's in the Caribbean Sea? If you answered pirates, you're exactly correct. And so this ship that was meant to change the history of American science was actually stopped by pirates, and the metric standards that were made out of metal never made it to America because the pirates sold it. So that's how close America was to actually using the metric system. America actually attempted giving it another shot at adapting the world used Celsius and metric system with it. And to convert, they actually started using both the values. So if you were going on a highway, you actually had 2 speed limits instead of 1. When you were reading a forecast, there were 2 temperatures instead of 1. And if there's any American viewer who actually remembers it, I would be very glad if you could comment it down below, because I had no idea about this. But because Americans protested so heavily against this double value system and they did not like the Celsius at all, the Congress decided that they were not going to be using the Celsius and the metric system. And since then, the unit has stayed the same in America. And that's how fascinating it is. And today it would be already too expensive to change it, so America will probably stay the same and not use the metric system. Inovitek, until next time.